Hey everybody, it is the 4th of July. For those of you who live in the United States, happy Independence Day. For everybody else, it's still the 4th of July. Happy 4th of July. So I recorded a conversation, it was yesterday actually that I recorded the conversation, but I spent a good part of today editing it. With Doug Lane, we talked about a variety of things, mostly Antifa or Antifa and their assault on the... Some would say he's a journalist, others use other terms, but on Andy No. And I'm not going to talk about that here. That's all in C-Realm Vault podcast, episode number 341. But we did touch briefly in the conversation, Doug and I did touch briefly in that conversation on the topic of breaking up big tech. And I tend to agree with folks who say, no, let's regulate big tech, let's force them to behave. Just carving them up into smaller companies won't necessarily curb their abusive behavior. I'm going to let that little scooter go on by. Ah, the young men in their loud trucks. What was I talking about? Oh, yes. Breaking up big tech, regulating them, forcing them to behave properly. Now, there's a thread on the C-Realm podcast discussion group on MeWe where I'm soliciting people's opinions on breaking up big tech. And somebody chimed in talking about, European regulations that require companies to delete information that they have, delete data on users should the users request it. And that's something that should be implemented here in the United States and probably expanded upon. And I got to spinning out a, you might call it a fantasy scenario, but I would say more of a speculative scenario in which memory, organic living memory that happens, in our brains, and the sort of memory that, the ability of a computer to store data and recall it later on command, we also call that memory. And right now that's one word for two very different things, but in the future, they will become less different to the point where individuals just thinking, speaking, thinking, acting will, without even intending to, be creating digital records. And sometimes I can imagine people who are just trying to recall something, not asking a computer for help, but the computer is watching, knows what you're trying to do, and supplies the information for you. It's just going to become more and more difficult to tease apart where organic memory ends and digital memory begins. And once those two things are sort of fluid or interpenetrating or just hard to tease apart, if we have legal precedents which say information about me belongs to me, and you, if you have information about me, have to delete it at my request, well, we can get into a sort of bizarro situation, kind of a Black Mirror meets, what was that movie? Spotless Mind. What was that movie with Jim Carrey? Something of the Spotless Mind, where he ends up basically erasing all of his memories of a particular woman, with whom he had a relationship. And I think he's doing it for therapeutic purposes. But imagine if you go through a bad breakup and the person that you've broken up with, they broke up with you, you still love them, you cherish the time that you spent together, but they, he, she, they, serve you with court orders to delete all of your memories of that person. Or, perhaps in your memory you see just, the black silhouette of where the person would be, but you can't remember their name. You can't remember what they look like. You can't remember what they smelled like, what it was like to have sex with them. You know, you can't remember, you have a list of the places that you went together, but it's devoid of, you know, the richness of lived memory. Imagine if somebody could compel you to edit, you know, who you think you are. You know, you might define yourself in relation to this person, and when they pull out of the relationship, you know, given the right legal precedents and a failure basically to anticipate the misuse of these precedents in the future, they could force you by law to redefine your own identity. That seems nightmarish, or at least dystopian. Eternal sunshine of the spotless mind. Now, see, the phone should have known what it was that I was trying to pull out of my memory and supplied that information to me. Shows you that we're still a bit down the road from the singularity. I will talk to you again tomorrow.